Over 50 years of shows, picking 100 episodes to save out of all the available options, trying to get it all done in one video. Let's get to work. Alright folks, I have been meaning to get to this for a little while now because I was tagged in this sort of assignment thing by the Doctor Who Guide. Great channel! If you have never checked out the Doctor Who Guide, please do that. But what this is a challenge to select 100 Doctor Who episodes to save. So like the premise of the thought exercise is every Doctor Who episode except for the 100 that you select, or in this case I select, gets wiped from existence. You can't save them in any way. Not like, oh, lost episode, we have audio, we can... No, it's gone. Everything except these 100 are gone. And in disregard to how I normally treat these things, each individual episode counts as an episode. So in modern era Doctor Who, if you're talking two-parter, each half counts as an episode. You do the whole story, that's 2 episodes. You go to classic Who, you start getting into 3-part stories, 4-part stories, 6, 8. Every single part of that counts as an episode. So with that as the basis, this is my selection. And let me emphasize very quickly that quality of the episode is not the only thing I am putting into play and considering as a criteria for having an episode be included on this list. I will try and explain as briefly as I can why I put on here what's on here, but let's go. I'm going through these in chronological order in terms of airing because that's just the easiest way to deal with it. So, first up, The Unearthly Child. This, total no-brainer. Absolutely in it. It lays out everything. It is one of the best openers to any show, especially any weird sci-fi show that's ever been done. You have to have it. Forget about the story that it leads into. We're jumping straight to the Daleks. Now, we're not saving every single episode of the Daleks. We are doing episodes 1, 2, 6, and 7 because honestly, the story drags in the middle. So we're cutting that out because we're not losing too much. And we get 4 episodes of the Daleks. Next up for number 6, the final part, I believe it's episode 6 of Dalek Invasion of Earth, mainly just for the Doctor's goodbye to Susan, because yeah, it's worth saving just for that. The rest of the story is really good. It actually might even be my favorite first Doctor story, but it's not as essential in terms of laying out the foundation of what Doctor Who is and having it saved for posterity. Moving on from there, 2 parts from the Time Meddler, the last 2 specifically, because honestly, the build-up to figuring out what's going on, not nearly as interesting. Once the Doctor starts going in a battle of wits against the meddling monk, now we're talking. Next up, we got to cover the first regeneration. It's kind of important. I'm not necessarily going to have every regeneration covered, but we got to have the first one in here. I mean, it's so core to the whole thing, and it's important to have the initial time the entire concept was done. So, that means that we are going to do the last episode of the 10th Planet and the first episode of Power of the Daleks. Under current circumstances, that would be an animated recreation. Let's for the moment assume that we could actually get the real thing. So now we're into the second Doctor's era, and I'm going straight to Tomb of the Cybermen. All 4 parts. And yes, you can make some complaints about it, but I do feel this is quintessential second Doctor. He has wonderful stuff going on with Jamie. You have the Cybermen, who are done possibly the best they've ever been in this particular story. You've got terrific lines, some of the best lines ever from Troughton. You have not strictly speaking, a base Under Siege story, but it still has that flavor, so it still works very well as being representative of the second Doctor's era as a whole, and I'm biased. I just think it's the best thing that he was in. Now we're going to get to the War Games. Now, we are not taking a whole bunch of the War Games. We are actually taking very little of the War Games. We are taking episode 3, because it's the introduction of the sonic screwdriver, and we're taking episode 10, because that is the first appearance of the Time Lords. It also covers the regeneration for the second Doctor, or at least what sets it off. Up to number 17, and we're into third Doctor territory, and we're skipping his first couple of episodes. We are jumping to Claws of Axos, episode 4. A lot of people really like this story. I have mixed feelings about it. I am due to revisit it, I'll grant that. However, I only really want to preserve the 4th episode of that because the interactions between the Doctor and the Master in that episode, mwah, gold. And leading on from that, another episode, or story rather, that is a great example of the third Doctor at his best, plus does the interaction with the Master wonderfully, the Sea Devils. And we're doing all 6 parts of that. For 24 and 25, getting us a quarter of the way there, we come to the 3 Doctors. We're going to do the first part and the last part. So episode 1 and episode 4. Introduce the entire nature of multi-Doctor stories and sort of cover what happens with Omega at the end of that and where things sort of quote-unquote go back to normal. Next up, all 4 parts of the Time Warrior because it's really good and I love it. It's the introduction of Sarah Jane. It's my personal favorite 3rd Doctor story, so yeah, I'm biased. So, we're up to Tom Baker now. Robot, episode 1. Because he hits the ground running, you get the feel of this Doctor right off. We don't need the rest of this story, though, so just that first episode. Next up, Genesis of the Daleks. Let's get controversial. I'm not keeping this whole thing. I'm doing episode 1, episode 5, and episode 6. We're going to set up the entire thing of Skaro. We're going to get our time with Davros. We're going to have things like Davros with, his interaction with the Doctor, with that whole would you create a virus thing. We're going to have the Doctor's whole existential crisis of do I have the right? We're going to preserve that stuff, but a whole bunch in the middle we can chuck. Because I think it's overrated. Don't shoot me. Next up, Pyramids of Mars, episode 4. This is another Doctor, 4th Doctor story that I tend to think is a bit overrated. But the actual confrontation when he finally takes on Sutekh, really good stuff. He's a good enemy. The solution for beating him is pretty neat. Keep it. Next up, get to show my bias again, City of Death. It's my favorite 4th Doctor, my favorite classic Who. It might even be my favorite Doctor Who story of all time. All 4 parts, we're keeping that. Next up, Keeper Trockham. We're not keeping the whole story, but we are keeping the crispy master dealing with the Doctor and his taking over of Tremas for his new body, which means we are keeping episode 4 of that story. So that takes care of Tom Baker. We're up to Peter Davison and number 40 on our whole countdown. We get to Castrovalva, and we're going to keep episodes 1 and episode 4 because I think the whole setup of Castrovalva is really neat. I think the resolution of Castrovalva is pretty neat. The stuff in the middle, whilst by no means bad, I don't think is absolutely essential to get what we need to out of this story. So just the front and the back. Next up, Earthshock. Episodes 2, 3, and 4. Drop episode 1 because honestly, it's a big lead up to the reveal of the Cybermen that kind of really doesn't matter, especially considering that the story doesn't really kick into gear until they get introduced. So scrap episode 1, keep the next 3 because, well, it's a good Cybermen story and a companion dying. Kind of a big deal. Next up, the 5 Doctors because it was done as one continuous thing. It only eats up 1 episode. Sure, why the heck not? It's kind of monumental. Now, this one's going to be weird for number 46. Warriors of the Deep, episode 3. Specifically for the Merca. And if you're wondering why on earth would I ever think we should preserve the Merca of all things, it's because it's kind of the visual and storytelling low point of Doctor Who as a whole and arguably helped get the show canceled. I think it is actually kind of important if we're going to preserve the entirety of Doctor Who to recognize that it wasn't always gold and that this is how it could be at the low point. I only need 1 episode as a point of reference for that, but I actually kind of think it should be there. So that brings us to Caves of Androzani. Final story for Peter Davison. Keep the whole thing. So that's 4 episodes. That gets us up through 50. And we get to 51 and Vengeance on Varos, I guess, both parts so that Colin Baker is at least represented because otherwise he's not here. All his best stuff is in Big Finish, but Big Finish isn't in play for this particular exercise. So if that's the only way we get to acknowledge him, fine. And we get to Sylvester McCoy. Let's have Remembrance of the Daleks. All 4 parts of the story because the story is great. We're also going to have last episode of Survival because, well, that's how the show went off the air for quite a chunk of time. So yeah, let's have that on the record. Next up, boy, I was torn on this, really debated it, the 1996 movie with Paul McGann because, again, like, it's not perfect, but like that was an attempt to keep the thing going. It was the major Doctor Who release for about 26 years. I think we kind of need to preserve it on that basis alone. Plus, McGann's actually good. So, we're at number 59, and we have entered the modern era of Doctor Who. So, under Eccleston, let's start out with End of the World. I know not everyone loves this one, but honestly, I think it is a great encapsulation of the mood and the tone of the revived series in terms of the vibe of the Doctor himself, his place in the world, the dangers, Rose, you get a very good sense of in it, and the sort of the new companion template, and the various ands or whatever. I think it's a great encapsulating episode, so I think that should be the kickoff for Modern Era in terms of this preservation. Next up, Dalek. I shouldn't even have to justify this. It's the return of the Daleks. It's one of the best Dalek stories, so that is a no-brainer. Next up, The Empty Child and The Doctor Dances. Brilliant two-parter, so good on so many levels. It's creepy, it's scary, it's funny. Introduction of Jack Harkness. Yeah, no, we're absolutely keeping that. And then, Parting of the Ways. We are not keeping Bad Wolf because we don't need it. And it's not good. And now we're into Tennant's era. Forget Christmas Invasion. Don't care. We're going to jump straight to School Reunion because this one's actually, aside from just the nostalgia factor of seeing Sarah Jane again, it's actually really important because it illustrates how the show is still tied into what it was before. Plus, it's a cracker of an episodes anyway, so that's easy. Next up, let's do Girl in the Fireplace. Actually, I don't love this as much as a lot of other people do, but I like the way that the story unfolds. It's got the feels for a lot of people, and that's worth preserving. Next up, we are going to do Impossible Planet and the Satan Pit because I friggin' love them. And like, this is not an unbiased list, okay? Like, at some points, I'm putting a more academic perspective on it. Sometimes it's just like, I really want to be sure that gets saved, and that's going to be it for those. Next up, Army of Ghosts and Doomsday. I debated whether or not we could get away with just having Doomsday and not needing Army of Ghosts, but ultimately the build-up is kind of necessary because otherwise we just basically jump into the middle of the climax of the story. So we are going to preserve both of these, largely for the fun of the Cybermen and the Daleks together, and also the tragedy of Rose. Up to number 70, Human Nature and the Family of Blood. Epic, awesome, creepy, romantic, what's not to love? Blink, duh. Utopia, and possibly controversial, not keeping the other 3 parts of this John Sim original master thing, because I don't like it. And I don't think it's a particularly good representation of the master as a character, nor is it a particularly good series finale for Series 3. But Utopia, that's great stuff. It's a good story in and of itself. Derek Jacobi, you get a taste of what John Sim would do with the character without being stuck with him for entire episodes, so he still gets his little taste in the thing. Next up, Time Crash. Yes, I personally made the choice to put the minisodes into play and consider them as options. So that's why this is here. It's a wonderful celebration of a specific era of the Doctor. And again, a bit like School Reunion, shows the show's relationship to its earlier iteration, which I think has value aside from the fact that it's a fun little thing in and of itself. Next up, Fires of Pompeii. I actually initially didn't think that I would have included this, but having recently rewatched it, the empathy of Donna and the way she kind of forces that onto the Doctor, forces him to not be cold and cruel and to take the damage that is going on around him under consideration and to realize that saving anybody still has value even if you can't save everybody. That's important and it matters, and it's part of why Donna is awesome, so we keep it. Next up, Silence in the Library, Force of the Dead. It's fun, it's funny, it's got River Song, it's scary because it's got the Vashon Narada, it's got a cool concept, it's got Donna being heartbreaking, it's got everything, we have it. Next up, Midnight, frigging terrifying and the most perfect challenge for Tennant's Doctor, and he fails. Let's see the Doctor fail. It needs to happen every now and then. Here it is. Nice. We're going to jump to Journey's End. We are going to skip the Stolen Planet because, unlike Army of Ghosts and Doomsday, I do actually think we can get away with jumping into the second half of this, and that's where all the payoff is. And with the episodes I picked ahead at that time, I think the payoff still works. Next up, the 11th Hour. I would say quite possibly the best opening story for a new Doctor. It has a terrific introduction for Amy. Smith's right on the ball. It just hits the ground running. Vincent and the Doctor, this is such a touching episode, and it does just depression and suicide so respectfully and so beautifully and so tragically. I mean, this is just an amazing piece of television that needs to be preserved even outside of Doctor Who fandom. The Pandorica opens because what an epic setup in a first half of a 2-parter. We're not keeping Big Bang, though. We're just going to keep the setup and let people imagine how that resolved. Because whatever they come up with, it's going to be more interesting than Big Bang was. That's right, folks. Shots fired, but I'm moving on to The Doctor's Wife because It's fun and entertaining and shows a really good understanding of the dynamic between the Doctor and the TARDIS. We're going to do The Girl Who Waited. That is an underappreciated episode, and Karen Gillan is stunning in it, and shows the ruthlessness that the Doctor engages in because he feels he has to. It shows the pain of what it's like and for the decisions he has to make. Let's get to The God Complex, which is a wonderfully layered, dark examination of the Doctor, and again, the sorts of things he tends to face. Very underrated episode, and I think is brilliant thematically. Night of the Doctor, and the fact that I wanted to have the Night of the Doctor is a big part of why we have the 1996 Doctor Who movie, because this doesn't pay off well unless we also have that. So honestly, yes, that's getting dragged along just because I want Night of the Doctor so dang much. Day of the Doctor. I know people are pretty mixed on this, but it's the 50th anniversary. It gives us the War Doctor. It is love it or hate it, it is a celebration of Doctor Who as a whole, and I think should be preserved. And we are into Capaldi's era, so let's keep Mummy on the Orient Express because it's just really good. Death in Heaven, which is underrated as a series finale, and it has some really great interactions between Missy and the Doctor. And then we go to the Zygon inversion, basically just for that speech. We do the 1-2 punch of Face the Raven and Heaven Sent. Tragic loss, dealing with that loss and the pain of grief and overcoming that metaphorically through breaking down that wall. And you better believe we are not having Hellbent. Oxygen, because I think it's a really solid episode with some cool things to say, and I like the way the themes are handled. I know some people get uppity about this one. I think it's really good and a fun story besides. And plus, consequences. Doctor goes blind, like for a little while. That's kind of important. Extremis. I feel like this one kind of gets underappreciated because of its tie to the two-parter that comes after it, but I do think this holds and stands alone on its own, and it takes a core premise that sounds like, well, whatever the answer is, it's not going to work, but it actually does, and it works quite well. And plus, we get to see, again, the fact that the blindness lasted for a bit. Let's have the consequences stick. I like it. Here we are, folks. 5 more episodes to go, and I'll be out of numbers. Next up, World Enough in Time and The Doctor Falls. World Enough in Time because it's the Monda Cybermen done better than basically anything outside of possibly Spare Parts. And Spare Parts is Big Finish, so it's not on the table. So let's have this, because it's creepy, and it is... I love Missy in it. I love the Doctor in it. Yeah, we're gonna do this. And The Doctor Falls, I think, is a much better send-off for Capaldi's Doctor than Twice Upon a Time. And even kind of like Twice Upon a Time, but not enough to preserve it. So that does mean, sorry haters, we are going to have some Whittaker episodes on this list. First up, Rosa. And yes, if you've seen my videos talking about Rosa, I have very complicated feelings about this story. However, I will not deny its power and its ability to drive a conversation, and I think it works very much as a mission statement for what the show is trying to do at this period in time. And again, love it or hate it, this needs to serve as a preservation of what the show is and has been at various points. Rosa matters on that front. But then we get to the 2 episodes that I think are actually the best episodes of Series 11 so that we can round out this list. First up, that gives us Demons of the Punjab, because it deals with a piece of history that the kind of people who either make or watch Doctor Who aren't particularly familiar with, but honestly, we should be. And again, feels a very much natural progression off of Rosa, and it takes you away. Best episode of Series 11, best episode that Whittaker has been in as of time of this recording. It is weird and bizarre and sublime, and I freaking love it. And that is 100. Whew! I could have easily made this video an hour or more and gone into really exhaustive detail on each of these entries, because I've spent actually quite a while putting this list together, but I honestly just had a lot more fun rattling through them as quickly as I felt I could get away with. So, that's my list of 100 episodes to save and preserve from Doctor Who, from its original airing in 1963 up through 2019. Beginning of 2019. I don't know if we'll end up with a special like on Christmas or something. They haven't announced it, but who knows. But, yeah, that's my list of 100. I'm not going to tag any other people in this project because I didn't do the legwork to figure out who else might have already been tagged by other people. And I also feel like I kind of missed the window and from when this thing was going. But anyone who sees this, who wants to take on the challenge, by all means, go for it. Even if I don't name you, consider yourself invited to join in this little project. So whatever your thoughts are on my list, your list, if you only want to do a top 10 or whatever, you want to do a full 100, whatever you want to do, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. There's the Patreon down there, which helps actually cover my bills at this point. Also, there's other stuff down there besides. Click on it. The links take you places. Check them out or don't. I'm not going to tell you what to do because at the end of the day, you are the council. I'm just running the meetings. So until next time, this council is adjourned.